Hello and welcome to another episode of the Walled Garden Podcast. So today I have quite a long conversation for you, but nonetheless, I'm sure that you will find just so much value in this episode, because I'm speaking with somebody who I met through the Practical Stoic Podcast and through my coaching practice, and somebody who I consider to now be a really good friend, and somebody who I also consider to have real wisdom. His name is Joe Tucker. Now, Joe doesn't have anything to sell, he doesn't have anything to promote, but I just said, you know what, Joe, come on the podcast. I want to talk to you. I want to just sit down and let's have these conversations that we usually have in private, but on the show, because I think that there's so much interesting stuff that we could discuss that I want all of you to be able to come in and listen to as well. So, I guess that's all I really want to say about Joe. He's an amazing person, somebody who I'm really looking forward to hearing a lot more from. And the other thing that I will say just quickly before we do start the episode is if you want to become one of the first 100 members of the Walled Garden, head over to thewalledgarden.com and use the promo code Practical Stoic, all one word, all caps, to get a discount off your membership for the Caretaker membership. And also, don't forget that my first book, The Poet and the Sage, is now available. You can go to thewalledgarden.com and go to the store link on there, and you will find the book there, and we ship internationally. So I really hope that you grab that book, because it's something that I poured my entire soul into. And if you want to know the direction that I'm going, and if you want to have access to the deepest wisdom that I've been able to catch in my life, then this is the book to get you there. So, as I said, go to thewalledgarden.com, head to the store link there, and you will find it. And I should probably also just quickly mention that I've dropped you into this interview at a specific point where we've really just started talking about Amazon. And so sorry for the random drop in. It's just we kind of just started talking, and then I thought this is the most appropriate place to just start the interview. So here we go. My interview with Joe Tucker. You want to support other businesses, but it just pulls you back in.
And the biggest, and then you have that Amazon Prime deal for the year, and I'll do that, but every time it comes up, it's like $100 or so for an entire year. I have to look at it and say, is this something I want to do for the next year? Is this something I really want to do? I have to tackle with that,
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to keep on talking, and I'll cut this out if I don't want it in the podcast, but I think we should just start afresh like this, because this is great. One thing I do think about Amazon is it's very hard. Like, I think it's really hard to actually make I think it's more difficult than what most people think it is to make a moral argument against using something like Amazon. Because at the end of the day, like, Amazon has been voted by the population as like, this is an extremely competent, useful, good product that helps us to get things that we might need quicker, and of course it's all tied into our very perhaps unhealthy need for extremely high productive output of our society to give us what we want as soon as we want it, and to give us anything that we want as soon as we want it. But nonetheless, it's kind of like Walmart, where it's like, a company like that comes along and it does help to like lower the prices for the general populace and stuff like that. And
we know
it's tough to wade through that moral landscape. You know what I mean?
Oh, it is. And when the pandemic hit, I was working at a restaurant, same restaurant that I'm working at now. What really struck me was, I don't think we were as familiar with our infrastructure as far as really moving things around. Like, our entire economy is based on, can we get something there fast enough? Here in the United States, And I'm sure, it's that way everywhere, but here especially is such a dense network of um, just almost farm to table with manufacturing to distribution, where like it's almost immediate. You can get anything almost immediately. It's crazy. And when the pandemic hit, our biggest bottleneck wasn't the actual supply. We had the supply. It was that demand was so high that the distribution was what took a hit. We have things in warehouses everywhere. We have, like, I remember the big one was sanitizer. We had sanitizer. I mean, it's alcohol based. It's incredibly easy to make. We have drums of the stuff in this town that I live in, but we can't distribute it to people because we can't put it in containers because the containers come from China. All of the containers that were manufactured pretty much came from anywhere else. We have very little that we manufacture here in the United States. It's one of the reasons we moved to glass, and we were using alcohol distilleries, places that would normally give out vodka are now making this really weird kind of oily sanitizer because they have the means of production and distribution at the same time. They have the bottling, we can do local glass bottling here. And so that ended up being the name of the game. Was we have all of these things. It's just, can we get it to people? And that was the biggest struggle, was getting it there. And I think that's why Amazon, I think, is so big as they are, as such a big part of our lives, is they have the best distribution network out of any major company in the world. It's incredible.
And so
because
in that way, what they've done is they've climbed this, hierarchy of distribution, and they've said, we're the kings now, where this is our game and we do it better than anybody else. And so in that way, when I say that the general population has voted them up, like, it's very easy to be like, oh, Amazon, because there's lots of reasons to think that perhaps it's a company that we don't want to necessarily spend a lot of our time and energy and money on. But then again, you think, well, there's actually a whole bunch of things that they're just doing way better than anybody else. And that's why, in many ways, the humanity has voted them up. And it's happening in Australia now. Like, I'll tell you, one thing, I think the American kind of way, the American culture is certainly spreading around the world. Like Joseph Siracusa, he says that American diplomacy is like, what does he say? It's like Guinness. It doesn't travel. That's his his classic way of saying it doesn't what we just saw with the Iraq war and everything in Afghanistan. It's like American diplomacy doesn't necessarily travel, but I think the culture is traveling really quickly. And so over here in Australia, like, I can still remember the days when Sundays, like, you couldn't go anywhere really. Like, I can still remember those days where Sundays were the day where shops closed, right? I'm not sure if you can remember that in America.
It's still like that here.
It's still like that? Really?
Oh, well, I live in the South.
Okay, that's true. That's true.
There's a lot of places here where, I mean, still in certain counties, you're not allowed to, we have dry counties still. Can't buy liquor, can't buy, that was a law recently in grocery stores here in Tennessee. You couldn't get wine in grocery stores. It was illegal until like 2016, 2017. And then, you still can't get liquor in Walmart. Can't get it. You can get it in
still
the Western
case
states.
Here, pretty much in every grocery store.
But like, everywhere would be closed on Sundays. And because, I mean, everybody, like, why would you be open? Nobody's going to come buy anything from you. It wasn't like a personal decision of, oh, we're all going to be busy. It's, why would somebody work if nobody's going to come buy your service? Everybody is busy at home with family, at church. That was such a huge part of life for most of our lives growing up. Not so much, like, it is starting to change a little bit, but it's still like that in a lot of towns here. They're small, but that's part of living in the South, though, I guess. And I guess it's probably different in the small towns. I haven't spent a lot of time in the smaller towns in America, but I have spent time around those places where it's kind of like any time of day, no matter what, you can find what you need. If you just drive out, 5 minutes from your house. And like, Australia really hasn't gone that far yet, but now we have Amazon coming in, and
I've noticed that over the past like 2 years, it's like, yeah, they've gone from setting up the business here where you still have to pay for shipping and stuff like that. And then, it might take a few days or a few weeks, but now they're like really amping up, like they're setting up the whole infrastructure in Australia so that, we have almost as quick delivery as America now. And yeah, it's just really wild to see. Like I've always felt like if we could have some sort of happy medium between Australia and America, like Australians just really like their lives. Like we work to live, not live to work. I feel like America has that real intensity about like just hustling until you die kind of thing.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I really love about America. I do love that the society is so entrenched in this. We're going to be the best at everything. I do like that, but I do also really like the Australian way, which is it's a very kind of working class. We're gonna really enjoy our lifestyle. That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's why all of us live at the beach. It's like we couldn't be bothered going out and building a Vegas in the middle of a desert because it's not close to the ocean.
Closer to a European kind of mindset. Yeah.
Certainly.
There are parts here of the country, like especially here in the South. I think there's this town that I live in. I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's kind of blowing up in a lot of ways. The grind isn't as pronounced here, and it's a beautiful town. There's a river, everything's walkable, and it's gorgeous. They put a lot of money into making sure that it is a aesthetically pleasing city for people to vacation to. It's a vacation spot, and it's weird, having an interior vacation spot that's also, we have municipal fiber, which I think we're one of like only a couple places in the country that can do that, where our utility, our internet utility is a utility. Most places in the United States, it's a service. Here, it's a utility in this town. So, the same place that you get power, telephone, whatever, you can also get internet, and it's so cheap. It's incredibly cheap. I can get a gigabit of fiber for like $70 a month. And whereas everybody else in the country is angry that we get this. But because of these, this is a kind of place that a lot of people are flocking to now, but it's a place where you can take your time. You can go hiking, 10 minutes, 15 minutes out, you're out in the forest. And it's a really great draw about this place. And it's something I've noticed about the people here is, even though in this county, we have probably 300,000 people now, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it. It feels small town because everybody's doing kind of small town things. Walking around, everybody walks here, everybody. And that's something I don't see as much, unless you're in a really big city, but then it's, a lot of urban development. It's really, really built up. It's not like that here. It's partially built up, but yet you still have that walking feeling. And so you end up recognizing people on the street all the time. I can't walk down the street downtown here without running into somebody I know, especially working in the restaurant industry. It's something else.
Do you that must be so nice though, right? Like to have that little essence of kind of a small town feel.
Yes and no. I remember one of my coworkers years ago, which I'm not going to say her name, but she put a quote on Facebook. Like it was one of the most poignant things any of us had ever heard, and that was that Chattanooga was the biggest high school she had ever gone to. Was this town, because everybody knows everybody, and especially in the food industry. And that's, for better or worse. When you say somebody's name, somebody goes, they'll ask about, they'll ask first name and last name. We say last names here all the time. It's not just you're an intimate little circle. It's, people in town, who owns everything, where the money is up on the mountains. Like, it's common knowledge who's a player here. It's common knowledge who works where. You'll probably work with them at some point in your lifetime if you work in that industry, whatever it is. But that's kind of people that stay downtown, live and work and stay downtown all the time. And so it's, I don't know, sometimes it's good, but I mean, if you make some sort of misstep, then that's a whole group of people you end up avoiding, like
Yeah.
just like a high school. So that's why I think that quote is so poignant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But it
I
reminds me
kind
a
of
lot
like,
of
sorry, go on.
Greece. But it's like ancient
Mm.
Greece, like ancient Athens. That's how it was, where we have a market that we do on Sundays, like a kind of like a giant farmer's market, and everybody will go.
Mm.
And you'll run into people there maybe that are working an event, but you're always going to see people there. There's
Mm.
always something going on. There's always somebody performing in some way. It's a regular thing here.
Mm.
It's not just like festivals that we do this. It's all the time. We're always trying to do these little things. And it feels like what a lot of ancient cities felt like in that way, where
Mm.
people have a lot more engagement with the community.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry,
Well,
I didn't mean to.
no, let's continue this discussion about engagement in the community as well, because it's something I've been thinking about recently. And but first, I want to actually introduce you to everybody who's listening. I will have done a little, introduction at the start, but
Mhm.
by way of a introduction that perhaps can even spur on some more discussion between us, I wanted to tell you about this. I want to make a shout out to a guy called Glenn, who in many ways reminds me of the relationship that we have, right? So Glenn is this guy who lives very close to me here in Mooloolaba, and this is actually a good segue from our conversation now, because I will go for walks to the beach every so often. I try to do it often, and often at night as well. It's really beautiful. We've got this beautiful boardwalk out there at the beach, and it's just a great place to live, Mooloolaba. But I'll be walking along, and occasionally Glenn will be sitting out the front of his apartment complex, playing his guitar. And he's kind of learning new songs, and he's an elderly gentleman, and I stopped and I said hi to him one night, because I was like, hey, I really love that you're sitting out here playing music, and you're not doing it to busk, you're not doing it for any other reason than you just want to be out and about playing music on a beautiful evening. And so I stopped and I had a chat with him. And the first time I chatted with him, we found out that he had actually stopped and listened to me multiple times when I was younger, busking on the street up in Mooloolaba. So he already knew me. But the first time we met while he was playing his guitar, we ended up speaking for like an hour and a half. Because he's the kind of guy who, he has a very quick mind, and he's, very interested in a lot of different things, and he's seen a lot over his life. And he like me, and probably like you, feels the intensity of the times. There's a real
Yeah.
intensity about what's happening everywhere around the world at the moment. And so we both have these very quick minds. I say that not in an egotistical way. It's probably a disadvantage sometimes, but we like to jump around ideas, and we're very quick to, jump from this to that and this to that. Very open-minded people in terms of our personalities. And so
Right.
we'll just be jumping around all these different subjects. And by the end, you just feel like, man, we've really like come to some interesting ideas here that we can chew on about what's happening in our culture. And so shout out to Glenn, because I had another conversation with him the other night, and I just love this guy, because it's almost as if I feel like when you come across a person like that, it's like you've come across a real human being who's he's not thinking he doesn't think just like everybody else has taught him to think. He's just interested in exploring the possibilities, exploring ideas, having a conversation where, maybe we disagree on some things, maybe we agree on some things, but we both have that common excitement to discuss ideas and principles and all this sort of stuff. And it really feels, after a conversation like that, you just feel energized, right? And the
Yeah.
reason I bring up Glenn is because I feel like I have the same kind of conversations with you. And, for everybody who's
Awesome.
listening
Yeah.
to the podcast, I mean, Joe Tucker here, we've known each other for, a few months now. We started talking a few months ago. And since our first discussion, I was like, man, I want to talk to this guy more often, because I've come across a human being who is so interested in ideas and principles and in contributing to our culture, you also don't have any of those hang-ups that you find in so many people where, you are so tied to any one idea that you cannot explore others, And so, Joe, I love you, man. Like, I love these conversations. So I'm excited to talk, to you for as long as we can today and see where we go. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So yeah, shout out to Glenn and
first of all,
shout out to you, man, because you've got quite a mind.
Well, first of all, thank you, Glenn. I don't know Glenn, but he sounds like somebody I would really like to hang out with.
Yeah, he's a bloody champion. Absolutely, yeah.
Right, legend.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
And also, thank you. God, I've never been introduced before like that. That's it's a really great feeling, honestly. It's something. Why do we not do that more in our normal, just everyday life? When we introduce each other, like a new person starts at work, just be like, they have the most fantastic ideas about this and this, and now they're going to be part of our crew. It's more just kind of like, all right, let's show them the ropes. And no, when we introduce each other in real life, let's be like, let's be energetic. Let's be like that. Let's really hype this person up, because I got to tell you, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world, not only to receive it, but to give it. See, that's the thing is giving is the best. It really is.
Yeah. Well, that's why, I'm so upfront with people about the reasons why I chose, for example, Kai Whiting and Sharon Lebell to be my core contributors with the Walled Garden, is because they're people who, from the start, I had a real connection with them, because I could tell that they were willing to explore the most difficult questions with grace, with humility, with wisdom at disposal. And they're, I think what happens when you start really engaging with the ancient philosophers is you start to get a sense for the people who, it's almost as if you get a sense for the people who are true caretakers of the culture. Like, I think that, when I read somebody like Seneca, I get a sense that he is a caretaker. He talks about how I really want to write these letters so that I can pass this down from generation to generation, so that they'll have a firm foundation to stand upon, in their life. Like, he talks about that. And it's easy to throw him aside as a hypocrite, but hey, take a look at the lump in your own eye before you point out a speck in another's. Like, I don't think many of us have the moral fortitude to decry another person as a hypocrite. I certainly don't.
Right.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I find you to be very similar in terms of our conversations, to Kai and Sharon, in that you're a caretaker, and you want to continue to take care, and you want to continue to take care of people, and you love people, you love ideas, you love life, and you're excited about exploration, So I agree with you fully. It's like, there's nothing, I'm not trying to like lather you up with butter here, get all greasy and oh, you're amazing. That's not what I'm doing. And you're right. There's so much joy in giving a genuine compliment and in receiving it as well.
Right.
And so, man, like I said,
just do me a favor. Make sure you preheat the oven first before you throw me in, or else I won't crisp up enough and it just won't be great. Okay. We gotta have those layers. It's going to be a good time. So, I think
it's going to take me a while to break that analogy apart, but we'll let's go on.
I don't think there's an analogy there. I think we're just riffing. We're just having fun with it.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, on what you were saying about Sitka, a lot of people might accuse him of being a hypocrite in ways. But in truth, I think he did practice what he preached in more ways than we want to be honest about. And the biggest way about that is when he wrote, that was his practice. Yeah. I think his writing was his biggest practice, not his everyday kind of interactions, because remember, there are two Socrates. There's two people named Socrates. There's the actual Socrates that lived, and then there's the Socrates that everybody wrote about. And those are two different people. We write about, like, if you look at Plato, all the Platonic dialogues with Socrates, those are Socrates the sage, not Socrates the man that truly lived. It's based on Socrates, but they're not the same person. And I think that's a big part that Seneca puts forward, is not only was he not perfect, and he was honest about that. He was very honest about his own shortcomings, but also whether he, same thing with Marcus. Marcus might be doing all the things he has to do on the front, but he's also writing these, this intense diary, which I think was more for him and for God. I don't think he ever really meant for that to be published, but for Seneca, he knew that he was writing this legacy.
Yes, exactly. Seneca did know that, but you have to expand on this idea that he was writing it for himself and for God, right? Because this is something that I actually was thinking that I really want to talk to you about today. Okay, so I'm going to ask a few questions here, and you can just throw back anything that works. So you mentioned that there's two Socrates. Now, I've been thinking about a lot of that lately in terms of, you get an image of the sage. Sometimes you get an image of the sage because somebody comes along who is so clearly high above in that hierarchy of intellectual vigor, intellectual prowess, or just in their knowledge or their wisdom. And you look at that person and you think, this is as close to the sage that the human being has gotten so far. And then when you spend enough time with their thinking, it's almost as if, in your life or in your writing or in your journaling or anything like this, it's as if you can inhabit the spirit of the sage by taking that person's example and saying, well, maybe can they guide my writing, or can they guide my life in such a way that I am trying to inhabit their spirit and bring that out through me? Right. Do you think that's at all what they were trying to do with Socrates as well?
Well, do you remember WWJD in the 90s? What would Jesus do? Big thing here.
Yeah, same sort of idea, right?
It's the exact same idea.
Yeah.
I think that the goal is not to be a sage. The goal is not to be a sage. The goal is to try to do what the sage would do, because you're looking at what the sage is looking at. You're not supposed to be looking at the sage. You're supposed to watch the sage and see what direction they're looking, so you can look in that direction too. I think it's honestly pretty simple in that direction. And I think the way, especially Plato would write a lot with the dialogues about how he felt Socrates should be, who the real divine Socrates was. And I think that is, I think that in our, Sharon has definitely talked about like making meaning. I think that when you hold somebody up, whether they're necessarily those all of those things really happened, or they're looking at the same thing, and it's a great tool that you can also try to emulate. Whether that's a big thing about the Christians, I think, is you can't be Jesus. You're trying to emulate him. You're trying to do as he would do in a given situation, and you're going to fail a lot. But like, for a Christian, he did what was what the perfect being would do. And so you can't be perfect, but you can try. You can try to be like he was. And it doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be like him, but you're going to try to do as he did. And I think philosophically, that's what they did with Socrates, and all of the post-Socratics. All of them did that. And so I think they're all kind of peppered with Socrates too, which I don't know if it's good or bad for a lot of the distinct philosophies, but I think that he's definitely at the forefront of all ancient thought is Socrates. I don't know if I answered your question exactly.
No, you did. No, you did. And there's more to it too, because then you say, okay, well, who guides Socrates? If Socrates is this high, figure, and everybody thinks this is something that we could perhaps seek to attain the wisdom of Socrates through embodying the spirit of Socrates, so to speak. Well, he had this daemon, right? And so, that was it, in the same way that you say Marcus was writing it for himself and for God, right? Now, I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about the Old Testament prophets, for example. One of the things that distinguishes like a true prophet in the Old Testament is they so often come along and they say something like, "I can only speak the words that God puts through me," right?
Right.
As in, the true prophet in the Old Testament was somebody who they weren't speaking. It's almost as if they weren't speaking for themselves. They weren't even thinking about what they wanted to say about the situation. They had this prophetic, divine ability to be a vessel or a channeling of God's wisdom through, or the picture of the logos, you might say, through themselves and to the general population, who they had a different vision of their culture. They could see. It's as if they had the Marcus Aurelius view from above. They're watching their entire culture and they're saying, oh, now that I get this above view where I can see what you're all up to, things don't look too good. And they come along and they say, I'm seeing what's happening. Things don't look so good. I'm not speaking this because I just want to become famous like the rest of these 400 prophets who will just tell the king exactly what he wants to hear. I'm not speaking for the king. I'm speaking for what is above the king, which is God. And so, that's in a way what Socrates was doing as well, because he's saying, like, hey, there's this daemon that, will tell me when I shouldn't do something, and I won't do it when this daemon says that. And abstracted out, that's almost exactly the same idea as saying, I've got this God here who will tell me what to say, and I'm not going to say anything other than that. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. And it's that was the big divide in philosophy in the early days, was what made philosophy, because they, we've discussed this before. You had the sophists, which a sophist, it's the wise man. It's in a lot of ways, usually, sometimes they could be very wise and sometimes they could be snake oil salesmen. And I think that's a very human thing to do. If you see an opportunity where, we're all going to see, how am I going to make a living? How am I going to support myself? And if you see a golden opportunity where you're like, oh, I could just tell people whatever and they'll give me money, why not? I mean, that it worked for a lot of people. And then you have people like Heraclitus and Socrates, and a few other of there were a few pre-Socratics that were philosophers, not sophists. They despised the sophists because they were like, no, you care about making money. You care about living comfortably. You don't care about the truth, about what truth means, what existence is, what wisdom is. You don't care about this. I love wisdom. And that's what philosophy means. Philosophia, the love of wisdom. One who loves wisdom. And that I think that was the biggest. I wish that we would look at philosophy more like that. That we would actually look at, these are people that love wisdom so much that is their kind of life goal, is to figure out what that is to chase that dream a little bit, not to learn the correct, the history and the correct industry standard, but to really seek it out themselves. Not to live within the construct, but to break free and see the world as it is, not for how they're told to like it or how they would choose to like it, but for how it is. And I hope that we are in a bit of a philosophical renaissance, because we could use it. We could use it really bad right now.
I think we are. And, whether or not people, regardless of what people's views on, say, Jordan Peterson are, I think that he signaled a certain turning point in the philosophical world and the theological world as well, certainly the theological world, where he comes along and he is this university professor who perhaps is entrenched in that world of, people who claim to be wise, but perhaps they're, just carrying on the status quo. And he kind of jumps outside of that, and everybody looks and says, oh, this is a guy who's willing to risk everything in order to say what he believes to be absolutely true. And regardless of whether or not you think he's right or not about certain ideas, he signifies this shift. And look at how many people flocked to Jordan Peterson to say,
Right.
This is a guy who we really think that this is a important moment in history where we're starting to, and it freaked me out when he said on Joe Rogan's podcast that Joe Rogan was like, what are you trying to do? And I remember Jordan Peterson, he kind of goes, oh God, if I have to say it like this, I think I'm trying to resurrect the dormant logos, right? And when I heard him say that, I was like, ooh, like that's a huge theological statement. That's a huge philosophical statement. And also you have to have some balls to say something like that, because that's a dangerous game, but also one that is highly necessary, especially in our modern age. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So not only is he fearless in saying something like that, in that kind of response, it shows that it's something he's deeply thought about.
Yeah.
That he knows
has the inherent dangers.
He knows, and he says, well, especially saying something like that, we have to reintroduce the logos. We have to reintroduce God. That's something that he has thought so deeply about that he is now deliberately chasing that goal.
Yeah.
It was to have that amount of deliberation about you it's no small feat. Yeah. Because anyone that's attached to you is going to be a target. Anyone, your children, your family, everybody's a target. Anybody you work with. It could be, some people will go to you specifically, and in other ways, you really are putting yourself at major risk.
Yeah.
But yet, he was so deliberate in what he said and the way he delivered it about that is truly what he believes. He said something that he truly believes, that he thinks about every day of what he's trying to do. Which that's not to say that he necessarily is. It just means that he believes it so much that he is going to chase that. And I think that is a very hard kind of belief that is waning in a lot of ways that people do need.
Yeah.
And I think we see with younger people, especially nowadays, I think Christianity has a resurgence among younger people here in the United States. Yeah. And I think it's directly because they're searching for something. They need some sort of strong ethos because they grew up not having one. And I don't think it's due to being secular at all. I think it's due to there's no focus. There's no focus on anything other than just being happy from day to day, being sated,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's day in, day out, the same thing. You make money and maybe you can buy a new gadget, maybe you'll go out to eat, and that's kind of your life. New shows coming on Netflix, get to watch the new game that's coming on. Yeah. New season starting up in football. And that's most people's just daily life. That's it.
Yeah.
And so you have children growing up looking around and saying, is this life? Is there more to this? Why do I feel so empty? And so because they're searching, I think it's a very vital time that a lot of those modern day sophists are taking advantage of in a big way. When you have this many people searching, there's going to be someone who's going to tell you what you want to hear because they're going to take your money.
Yeah. And I think you're speaking to something that is really hitting hard with me, because I think one of the things that Jordan Peterson did for me was actually show me that there's nothing trivial about what I'm doing with the podcast, for example, and I shouldn't treat it trivially, right? And what I mean by that is I started to look back at the sort of content that I was delivering. I hate using the word content. Maria Popova once said, never consider your work or your art as content. And I think she's exactly right. Because then it just becomes like fodder that you're just giving out to a bunch of cows, to feed them, and they'll feed you in return. But nonetheless, I started looking back and I started thinking, I need to take this with a greater degree of seriousness, because
Right.
I'm actually messing with the hearts, minds, and souls of individual people who are going to listen to what I say. And they might just think, yeah, great, this is wisdom. This is a great thing, what he's saying. And they'll go away and they'll use it in their lives. But Stephen Jenkinson did a lot for me as well, because what he said was, most people rush out to, and I'm paraphrasing here, most people rush out to solve the problem, but they haven't even taken the time to figure out what the problem is, right?
Yeah.
Figure out what the problem is, then you might go out and see if you can try to solve it. I realized that I really had no idea what the big problem is. I think Jordan Peterson is trying to figure out what's the heart of the problem that we see in our society at the moment. I'll go stab that, right? Instead of chopping off one head at a time of this many-headed monster, right? I'll go stab that thing. And I agree with you. There seems to be this renaissance of meaning making in our culture, because I think that we're in a time of Babel. And what I mean by that is, there's obviously this tale in the Bible of Babel where, they build this monstrous, building, getting higher to God. And, it's like they get themselves as close to God as they can possibly get. And then God disperses them and nobody can understand each other anymore. I think we see that in our society. Like, we've got artificial intelligence. We've got, as we were talking about with Amazon, the quickest delivery of, we've ever had in history. You can have anything you want at any time. Intellectually, technologically, we've got these advancements that we're building this giant tower to, get as close to being God as possible. I often quote, like, man, we clone things now. That's insane. Yeah. It's insane. But what do you see? Even with the internet, it's like, I think the internet is the biggest Tower of Babel. Now we're fragmenting. Nobody understands each other anymore. We don't have that central value system for our culture. And I think that what Peterson and many other people are trying to do is they're trying to say, well, what's that central idea, that central sage, or that central what's the central rock of our culture upon which we can rely, that we can bring people back together? Do you know what I mean?
I do. This isn't the first time that specifically America has gone through this kind of renaissance. It was in the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a line, under God, and under God did not exist before the 1940s. It was added, I think, after World War II, maybe early 50s, during a huge resurgence in Christianity in America, in the 40s and 50s. That would be really common. And I think culturally it was common for a lot of people, but in urban centers, it was kind of on the downside, especially during the 20s. And so there were a lot of, when the Depression hit, I remember reading, there were a lot of, folk revivals, and, people were starting to, I'm not sure if you've ever seen "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," but it's a Coen Brothers film, and it's a great piece about,
I know the music, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
You really need to see it. Which, of course, growing up with that music was good too. But, I lived in an area very close to where that would have been set. I lived in, Memphis, Tennessee, and the towns that they were talking about were only like an hour and a half away. And it was, if you go to those places, a lot of that is still pretty rough. I mean, they have electricity, of course, now, and they didn't in a lot of places back then in the 30s. Electricity was very, very widespread in the United States by the 30s, and it still wasn't in the South. And they would have these huge revivals of, like baptizing people in the river, and huge revivals of Christianity, and old school Christianity, like 1800 style Baptist faith. And I think this cycle has existed for a while, where we'll go forward technologically, we'll go through times of peace, and then something hard will hit, and we'll face new struggles, and everybody will turn back to, because they forget that every new generation forgets what the last generation had to go through.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it happened in the 1800s, when after the Napoleonic Wars, we didn't have really any major wars for a while. It was considered a huge time of peace in Europe. And then after almost 100 years, you have World War I, where everything came to a head, and everybody forgot, that central peace mission that everybody had been searching in Europe. Well, I mean, they have a central mission, even though, of course, they're colonizing Africa at the time. But I think people forget. I think when you don't, because that's how knowledge works. It's based on your own, what you can see around you. It's empirical. And if you can't see it, I mean, it's in the past. It happened back then. It's not now. Why would we care about this? History right now, I think in the United States, history as a major has a 2% graduation rate. And that's not to say that it's 2% of people who go for a history major. It's 2% of all degrees are history degrees, with something like 60% being business. If you look at Austria at the turn of the century, around 1900, where we have all of these huge ideologies, original socialism and communism, and a lot of the fascist ideologies all started in the same place at the same time. Can you imagine what the rate of history degrees was then, of people that did nothing but think all day in that town? It's huge. And here now we don't have that anymore. And I agree with Joseph Syracuse. I went back and listened to a couple of his more recent ones that you put on, which are fantastic. And
he's a true wise man. Hey,
exactly. You've seen him live. He's lived through all of these things, and now he's watching it happen. All of these things that he's read about, he's watching it happen with his very eyes. Nobody remembers any of this. Nobody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
No young person today knows what communism was like. Not a single person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that's happening, because until we acknowledge that, we can't even come close to fixing it. It's going to take something awful happening again, like what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if that was a big enough lesson for us to learn. I feel like it affected a lot of people very negatively. And now that we're coming out of it, I see a lot of the same behaviors. A lot of people have chosen not to change. It's already in the past for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the strange thing, right? And I think that what's really interesting to me is that there is that kind of fragmentation now, where people are falling into their certain ideologies. They're falling into it's like there's certainly the reemergence of these ideological gods, that people form the bodies of, right? And what starts to happen, it seems, is that, well, at the moment, there's so much tension around the world. It's almost as if people are kind of like turning to politics. And then I feel like they're quickly realizing that politics isn't going to be their salvation, but people are looking to politics for their salvation. They're looking to all these different places for their salvation, right? And I think that ultimately we're all going to come back and realize, oh, okay, we've been talking about this for thousands of years. There is a theological or a spiritual path to go on that perhaps we have overlooked until now. It's the same thing that, Confucius, he said something like, the way is the capital W way is lost without the rites or the rituals, right? We need those rituals. We need that deep tradition to kind of follow the roots of our culture way back to, its emergence. And without those roots, it's like we become this withered plant, like there's no substance to us. There's no substance to the culture. It starts to fall apart. But I think that people are, and this goes to what you're saying in terms of this revivification of philosophy and of religion and of theology and all these sorts of things, because people are starting to come back to that cultural root, that cultural ritual or tradition, to realize again that, we've strayed off the path, but let's pull it back in so that we have something to hold on to. And this is something I've often said about Heraclitus and philosophy, because he obviously talked about this idea of, we're in this river and the river is constantly changing and we are constantly changing. And I feel like religion, tradition, theology, philosophy, these are the things that helps us to have some sort of firm foundation upon which we can rely when we are in a river that is constantly changing. And we need to learn how to be caretakers of these traditions, not just to tear them apart and be so egotistical and prideful as to believe that we could just go off on our own and have any sort of substantive firm foundation in our lives for meaning. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. If you don't mind, I would like to speak about what I've learned from working in service, working in kitchens for my entire life.
Yeah.
So I first came to Stoicism through a breakup, really, really rough breakup a few years ago. And I was looking for ways to be more resilient, which at the time, it was starting to go through a bit of a resurgence, especially on YouTube. And, Massimo has put out a couple of videos at that point. He had like a TED talk that he was a part of for TED Education, and about, how to be resilient, because that was a big complaint that my girlfriend from before had was she didn't feel that I could be self-sufficient. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be as self-sufficient as is possible. And I ended up, I was going to move to this town, and I couldn't. My roommate, this is kind of a bad situation. He just wasn't really prepared to go off on his own. And so there was no way I was going to be able to afford an apartment on my own. So I decided to deck out my car and I moved into it. I took out the back seat. I made this cool platform. And I did that for a while in Memphis while I was at my parents' house. I'd moved back in with them, and then I built out the car in secret. I would sleep in it every night, come in, shower in the morning, act like, I would just live normal life, but my room was now in the car. And I would just keep expanding, where it was almost like I was in this infancy of learning where my limits were, what does it mean to be a person? And so that's kind of when I came to Stoicism, and I read a little bit by, I read the Meditations, read some of Epictetus, but I felt in some ways it stuck, in some ways it didn't. I came back to it when I got back on the road later. But one of the things I learned in kitchens, though, as I would read, the Stoics, I would see these common threads and these little things that you don't even think about. Like, in talking about ritual, the ritual of eating, of preparing food for someone and then sitting down together and eating. You have a really, really busy dinner service and you all sit down and you sit down together. You might not all eat the same food, but usually you're going to make one batch of food that everybody eats. And there's really no baser feeling, I think, for a human than to share food with another. That's a huge, huge thing. Restaurants are a huge thing because of, which it's kind of weird now that everybody's on their phones, but yet there's still that huge ritual of just sitting down and communing with each other. I mean, it's a religious icon for Christians. It's huge. The Last Supper, the communion,
totally
is a huge deal, because it's not just about, you're consuming a piece of Christ, you're mantling in a way. It's also, you're sitting down with all of these people and you are sharing with them, and you are taking part in this experience. And so the people that produce the food, that was the craziest thing, was we would be like eating steaks over trash cans. It's like, it's going to turn, so but there's something so deep there, so deep and so human, that I noticed working with the moral dregs of society, working with knives and fire and pirates. And it really, when I came to really reading the Stoics back in about 2018, 2019, that's when I started listening to your podcast. Actually, it was 2018. And I was on the road. I was living in California, living out of a van I had built out. And every new thing I would read, every new thing I would listen to, it wasn't that I would go, yeah, that makes sense to me. It was that I was able to check it against something in my own life, something that I had observed, and say, I've seen this. It's not true for me because someone is telling me, and they're telling me with conviction. It's because I've seen it. It's just, it was a central place for me to see all of these little parts of humanity that I had seen for years, but it connected all of them into one thing. And then you start to see just the simplicity of life itself and how we interact, that we just overcomplicate for no reason. And it's like you were talking about earlier about like meeting these people who you feel are almost real. Like everybody's walking around in a dream, and then you see somebody who, instead of like looking around like they're in a fog, can make eye contact with you, go, hey, what's up? How are you doing? What's been going on in your life? Like, and I found that I'm always that guy at bars that I've always, like everybody will be having the same conversation about this and that. And then someone will go, yeah, my cat died. And I'm like, dialed in. Here we go. Like, let's talk about something real. Let's talk about something about who we are and how we interact with things. And so I've always surrounded myself with that. It's just, it's crazy coming from, literally, I feel like the restaurant industry in a lot of ways is a cesspool of alcoholics and drug users. And, I have a copy of Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, and that was my Bible when I was young. It was huge. It was a huge deal for me because he's telling all these crazy stories. And not only did I want to live that lifestyle, I wanted to feel that way. I wanted to be cool. I always loved food. I loved restaurants, but I really loved cooks. I loved the antics of it. I loved it. And I didn't go into it for the money. I never cooked for the money. I cooked because something so deep spoke to me about just the act of cooking and sharing with people. Sharing a new idea. Like, instead of putting words on paper, we were putting food on a plate in new ways, new flavors, new textures. And I've met some of the most interesting and wisest people who have helped me become who I am. More so than most of my own family, friends, whatever, have come out of just cooks of all people.
Yeah.
And
the alcoholics, the crazy people. Yeah. Can I touch on something here then? Because I think this is a really interesting line of thought, because I've felt that exact same way. Like I've had a very innocent life, like grew up as a Mormon, never really spent much time. Like I actually told my parents the other day, I feel like one of the things that I missed from my childhood, at no fault of theirs, it was just my temperament, right? I never really had the courage to be the like, I did really well in everything that I did, and I pushed myself just enough, but I never had the courage to kind of like break the rules, in a big way, or to to be the kid who maybe pushes back a little bit, or but there's real courage in that, and there is a certain moral virtue in having the courage to kind of go outside the rules. And one thing I really love at the moment is the resurgence of comedians, right? These people who know the bottom of society, like they really know, like so many of the best comedians, like people like Tim Dillon, man, he was like a mortgage broker during 2000 or before 2008. He was selling all these terrible subprime mortgages. He's just this bottom feeder kind of personality who just comes up from a rough childhood and, goes out there and just has the courage to just go out there and like just make it, no matter what. But there is the courage that he had, to do all that sort of stuff, and that there is a certain moral virtue to that kind of, like you say, the alcoholics, the ruffians of our culture, even people like Bukowski. I love Bukowski's poetry, right? And one thing that he said, he wrote, or I think he told this great story where he moved to this new city. And he goes into this really rough bar, right? And he said the first night that he walks in there, there's a giant glass fight and they're throwing bottles around, and there's a prostitute over in the corner, and everybody's just rough and things are being thrown everywhere. And he said, I went there every night for the next year because I wanted that, and he said that scene never happened again while he was there, but he wished that it did, because that was where the life was, right? And there's something to that, like Jesus, he spent time among the people who were considered to be like the lowest of the society, right? But because it's like the higher you get in society, the more risk there is that you're going to go down paths that just lead you away from the realities of life, right? Now you can get attached to certain ideologies. You can start to believe you're all that, you can start to really just kind of, it's not clear to me that the people at the top are any more in touch with reality than the people at the bottom. And I feel like that's in a way what a really good philosophy or religion does. What it does is, like in the Bible, for example, this is something that Jordan Peterson said. In the Bible, there's stories that the youngest, child can understand. Like, this is what I get out of this story, right? And this is why it's important for my life. But also, these stories are formed in such a way that the most high-class intellectual academic can wrestle their entire life with these stories and still not get to the bottom of them. I wonder how that relates, to this idea that Christ was the person who came along and, spent time among the lowest of society. It's like, because a great philosophy needs to bring those two extremes together, right? And this is what I think the comedians are doing at the moment, because everybody loves the comedians at the moment. Like they're just, they're crushing it. They're huge, right? Because they're just telling you how life is, right? Tim Dillon just comes out and he just tells you how life is. And he's speaking to the people who are like, he's speaking to the drug dealers and the, the wheelers and dealers, the crooks, the snake oil salesmen. But he's also speaking like people like, like me, who have a very just normal life. I love this guy. I love this guy.
Do you know who they're really speaking to? Do you have money to buy a ticket? There you go. That is the only requirement. You don't have to think any certain way. Can you buy a ticket? Can you get there? There you go. That is it. Yeah. That's all you need. Can you turn on Netflix? There you go. Yeah. There's your ticket. You get to watch them now. Like, that is their only requirement. You don't have to be any certain way. You don't have to believe any certain way to just turn them on and watch them. Yeah. And that is, I think that's a really big part of how our society works nowadays, that there's such a huge amount of a huge sea of information that you can kind of just like wade in any part, but there's no requirement, and it's just always available. And I think it's the idea of being able to generate a new set, like Carlin did every couple of years, it's incredible. I think Segura is on a really big upswing right now, where he's gotten really popular, and I like his work.
He's unbelievable.
But at the same time, I think that there are some that end up buying into their own hype too much, and that ends up, now they have this audience, and then they become that that very thing we were just talking about. I think that I think that Joe Rogan is I don't know that he's necessarily even really an influencer at this point. I think that Joe Rogan, more than anything else, he reminds me of like an American Simon Bragg now, or not Simon Bragg, Melvin Bragg from the BBC In Our Time, where In Our Time is just, he brings on the panelists, they talk about something, they talk about something. Yeah, he's the modern version of that, where it's like, all right, we're gonna bring Murarescu in, and we're gonna talk about his, his book on psychedelics and early Christianity. But then we're gonna have Kanye West on next week. He is just, I think now at this point, he's gotten so big, he's like a conduit, because it started off being so popular and people wanted to hear. He was just gonna say what he wanted.
Yeah.
It almost makes me wonder how much of that still exists within what he puts out, because once you get that big, that's the scariest thing, is once you start really gaining traction, how do you hold on to that? How do you hold on to that passion and that belief when you have that opportunity? And I think that's the biggest tell for a person, is when that opportunity arises, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I'm in full agreement there. I think one of the great things about Joe Rogan is that he seems to approach every conversation with that beginner's mind. He has a real childlike ability to just ask anything that comes to his mind. It doesn't matter whether it's silly or extremely profound. But in the way that you're talking about it, I actually think that many of the comedians that we see today are doing a better job than philosophers at doing what a philosopher should do, or at doing what a theologian should do, or like in terms of, opening a wide umbrella and saying, you're welcome to come in here and listen, and I'm going to go and I'm going to have these interesting conversations with, people who have something really beautiful to offer the world. And they're not afraid to say what they want. Whereas I would say that most university professors today are pretty afraid to say things that they might believe to be true, but perhaps it doesn't fit with the status quo. And so they're very worried about losing their jobs, or they're worried about, what the students are going to think. I see this all the time. But you don't see that among the comedians, because they're not afraid to just say it how they think it is.
Exactly.
I think that's really beautiful.
And they live, I think that's the biggest thing about philosophy. Philosophy is not I don't think it's an academic pursuit. I don't know why we treat it as an academic pursuit. We treat it as history light. Like a philosophy degree generally is not that much different from a history degree, where, yes, you can do complex forms of philosophical logic, but most of it is learning what other people said. And I understand that even with a doctorate, but how much of that is interpretation versus actually adding something new? This is a new interpretation. Well, is this the point? We're doing all of this history and this kind of analysis. How much are we thinking about how we live? And that was a big thing for me when, when I bought a van in 2017, built it out, and I went west. And that was a big thing. Everybody in my family, every Christmas, talking to my mom, being like, well, is he going to go to school? Like, what's the plan? Because I had, I'd gone to school a little bit before, said, oh, it's not for me. And for my middle-class family, of course, they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why would you not go to school? That's crazy. Yeah. That's what you have to go to school. They'd be like, you're so smart. Why don't you go to, it's like, that's not what makes you smart. That's not the point. And people would ask, well, how are you going to have an education? I'm getting an education. Going and traveling and seeing people and understanding what makes a person. You can't learn in a book. You have to be around the people. You have to live it. Like, no amount of reading Kerouac is going to really bring you in depth into those kinds of situations. You have to go live it. You have to see it for yourself and go, you have to meet these people. You have to have a conversation in your own way. And there's a personalization there that you can't really understand it until you live it. And I learned that. I cared more about learning about what makes a person similar, different, whatever. And in working in as many places as I have, one thread that I've always found is not what makes us different, but what makes us similar. You know, working with an entire Hispanic kitchen, which I do now, it's different because I've had to adapt, and I've had to learn not just some Spanish, but I've had to learn a different language. And that is a kind of baser form of how do we communicate with each other. It's not just about language, it's about everything, expression, body language. And it's so different from culture to culture. And we're not really in tune with that, especially in the Anglosphere. We've never been really forced to come to terms with really, like, yeah, we deal with other cultures. We might go to a Chinese place and, you know, order stuff there. Maybe we'll have a friend whose like parents are Vietnamese, whatever. How much do we live and work with people that are insanely different from us?
Yeah.
You know, like I grew up in Memphis, and Memphis at the time, which I think it still is probably about 65% Black population, which in America, that's kind of how it is, where like you'll have huge swaths of land where you don't have very much I would say that most small towns in the South, you might have a town that is almost all completely white people, and then you have the next town over, almost all Black people. That's just it's how it is post the colonialism of the 1800s. And you would have these huge, you know, you had the diaspora of people like moving from area to area, huge Black populations moving. And so I remember growing up in Memphis, there was a culture completely dissimilar to mine, where they were still Southern, but, you know, in truth, they weren't. When I was a kid, I noticed there were little things that weren't the same, you know. And what really brought me into it, though, was moving somewhere else and finding the lack of it and going, I miss being in an area where, you know, Memphis is a huge place right now to move for industry, especially like commercial distribution. And so there's people from everywhere. And when I was growing up, I lived in a suburb. I had friends that were from any race you could think of. My neighbor was a half Iranian, half Turkish. Best friend I ever had as a kid. We would do the craziest stuff together. And like, I would go over to his parents' house and they'd be like, hey, we have naan and lamb. And I'd be like, oh, I love lamb. Let's do it. You know, like it's the best. Where it's like, oh yeah, my parents are having hot dogs tonight. Yeah, I would love to have your lamb. That sounds like the best. It's the coolest thing. And one of the things that I've noticed about living, you know, I moved to East Tennessee up towards the mountains, and it's not like that here. They are not as multicultural. And I found I miss it. I miss being around so many different people. And so now that I'm working in a Hispanic kitchen, it's one of the coolest things because it's like a total immersion into a completely different place. They're all Guatemalan. And so some of them speak a little English, they speak Spanish, and they speak Mam, a regional Guatemalan dialect that was like, you know, basically Mayan. It's like they're the remainder of the Mayan people. And it's a really cool language, by the way. It sounds almost like Arabic. It's crazy. But what I've really learned is just like we were talking about with food earlier, the little things where, you know, somebody will make something, and even though you're not one of them, you didn't grow up in the same area, you don't know the same things, they'll still make a big batch of something and they'll make you a bowl and go, here, eat this. Please, I made this for all of us to enjoy. You're here too. You're one of us in this. There's something so deeply spiritual about being able to truly connect with people and not just absolve differences, but find what makes us human. What is the part that we like? What is the human language that we all speak? And I feel like that's going to be probably a big part of my life's work, is not what makes us different. What makes us this, like, what makes us human? What makes us all human? What is a thread that we can all jump on?
Yeah.
And what is, when we look at each other, why do we always see that someone is different from us, instead of what are the idiosyncrasies that they bring to the table that make it more fun, that you're not used to? What, like, that's what comedy comes from. Comedy doesn't come from the, like, it comes from these little mundane idiosyncrasies of different types of people. Of, like, I feel like almost every story is about that. All the best ones from comedians is just these little tiny, like, yeah, so I was talking to my wife the other day and she said this. Does anybody else think that's crazy? And so that's, either way, I think that it's one of the greatest blessings to surround yourself with people who are different from you, that think differently than you do, because it makes you more whole in the end. It makes you more heterogeneous.
Well, I think one important thing that you're saying there is, like, well, let me demonstrate this further. So I had a completely different experience to you. My experience was growing up on the Sunshine Coast, which is just pretty much just like, it's a white area, like it's retirees. It's, just there's not much going on here in terms of intercultural relationships. So I had a different experience. I wouldn't say that is a bad experience, because there were, less, intercultural experiences for me to engage in here. I would just say it's a different experience. Now, when I went out into the world, I went on cruise ships. Now I'm on this cruise ship working in a crew that had representatives just within the crew from over 170 countries around the world, right? And that was a real, and the thing is, like, when I was growing up, I was super racist in terms of, I would tell racist jokes with my friends all the time. It's just something that I fell into as a kid, and I wouldn't say that there's anything, like, I forgive myself, because it's like, I was a kid, and I grew up in a super, like, white area, and I don't beat myself up over that, because what ended up happening was, you go out into the world, you start to meet people from different cultures, and you start to see, oh yeah, like, ultimately everybody just wants to, like, feed their family, have a bit of meaning in life, do their job well, and get on with it. But one of the funny things about the ship, like, if you ever want to get to know, like, the class systems of, like, the 1800s, it's like, you go on a cruise ship, man, you go down below the level of the guests to, like, level 2 or level 1. It's like you're in a different country. And the funny thing is, like, for the crew, there were 3 bars on this ship. The first bar, it was pretty much the Jamaicans, the Haitians, the Caribbeans, like that's where they went. The second bar, that's where all of, like, the musical theater, the Americans, some of the Europeans, like, it's just where they hung out, birds of the feather, right? And then the top bar was where you found, like, all the Russians, or Romanians, all these people, and it's like, it just worked itself out like that for some reason. But still, we got this experience of, like, you had to work with people from everywhere. And I think that one of the things that's happening today is people are putting the differences at the forefront of the reason why you should engage with other people. So it's like, I've had somebody email me recently saying, like, I've had a very white experience in my life, and I feel like I really want to, I want to learn from other, racial experiences and get a more diverse experience. And she was kind of emailing me with the intent to say, well, look, I feel like you should perhaps have some more diversity on your show. And there was something wrong about that to me, because I kind of feel like if you're just interested in human connection, right? If you're just interested in speaking to people and finding out what draws you both together in a common value system, how can we have a conversation that we both learn and grow from each other? That will be like, diversity will be a natural consequence of that. And she was also talking as if race is the only marker of diversity, when that's just not. Cultural differences, philosophical differences, theological differences, family differences. And I'll say
Was she
this,
by extension American? Because it sounds like a very American kind of
it
standpoint.
is. Yeah, it was certainly a very American standpoint. And it kind of worries me, because it is inherently like what you're saying is that I want to talk to you because you're Black. And because I think that, your Blackness is going to take. Now, I had a conversation with an Aboriginal Australian recently when I was in Cairns, and we spoke about this, I believe, in our last conversation, but I want to tell everybody else. It's like, I bought this didgeridoo because I really the didgeridoo was my first instrument. It's the first instrument I fell in love with. It's the sacred instrument of the Aboriginal people. And I kind of went into this art store up in Port Douglas and had this 2-hour conversation with this Aboriginal elder who was teaching me all about the mythology of their culture, the symbolism of their culture, the stories, the sacred nature of their instruments, and all this sort of stuff. I was captivated. I was absolutely engaged with that person in that time. And no reason for that engagement had anything to do with the color of our skin. It had to do with the fact that he had real wisdom to share, and I had ears that really wanted to listen, right? And to take that in. But I feel like a lot of people today, they'd have that conversation, they'd feel proud of themselves because they had a conversation with another Black person. That's some sort of moral virtue that they're diversifying. But is there anything more insulting to Black people or to any race than for somebody to say, I want to talk to you because you're Black, or because you're white, or because you're this? It's like, I have more to offer than that. I don't know.
I agree, because especially kind of the impertinence for someone to go, you need to have more cultural diversity so I can learn more cultural diversity. Like, you need to have it on your show so that it can trickle down to me more. Yeah. Instead of, okay, well, let's put it on that person. How dirty are you willing to get your own hands? There are places where you could, if you want to learn more, go be in those places where that exists. Go work at a Little Caesars in Harlem. Do it. You're going to find the culture that you're looking for. You're going to work with the people. You're going to go to their house parties. You're going to go to the bar with them. You're going to become a part of their lives. You might, I know somebody who recently got invited to somebody's kids' quinceañera. You have to put yourself in the position. If you want to learn about somebody, if you want to truly understand other people, you have to put yourself in that position. Don't get on Instagram or Twitter. Don't go to seminars. Go live. Go to, if you want to learn more about American Black culture, go to a church. Go to a Black church on Sunday. And, it'll be a long service. It'll probably be about 3 hours, but, you'll learn a lot, and you will make a lot of friends. And you will see people who, even as a Christian, you might see people who have a different kind of view of Christianity than you do. But you can't understand until you go. You can't, it's not something you can read about. It's not something you can go to class for. No, you have to go be a part of it. If you want to learn more about, the Thai people, go live in Thailand, go to Bangkok.
Yeah.
Go stay there for a summer. It's relatively cheap. You can save up money. You can go backpack and enjoy yourself, but also, why don't you try to get a visa and get a job at a restaurant, or something that doesn't take, it's skilled labor, but you can learn it and they'll teach you. Why not immerse? If you want to know more about somebody else, immerse yourself, and don't do it because of some sort of symbolism or some sort of guilt that you have.
Yeah.
Do it because of a curiosity, because I want to know somebody. Well, then go know them, go meet them, take the time. That's the biggest thing, is why demand that someone else is generous to you? Be generous with your time. Time is the most precious commodity we have. It's the only thing that we ever truly have. If you're to follow a lot of what the Stoics believe, there's only the now. If you really get into their ontology, there's a lot of that. If the only thing in your control is your conscious ability for choice, your rational sense, then the only thing that you truly own is time. And even that, you can't really own it, but it's the closest thing we have. It is the most precious commodity we have. So that means that the most generous thing you can do is not to give your money, it's to give your time. It's to give your time to someone else.
Yeah.
That is the most generous thing you can do. And you should. Everybody should.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody should expect to be catered to, ever.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And that's why when I got that email, something that confused me about it was this idea that, I think you should become more diverse and I'll sit here and I'll listen, rather than actually saying, well, it's like you go on YouTube, there's a whole bunch of, people from all sorts of ethnic backgrounds and cultures who are presenting what they have learned in their lives, and you can listen to anybody there. And I want to make a point about the going to a black church as well, because when I was growing up,
I knew you were going to come back to this.
Yeah. Still today, some of my favorite music, and I will jam out hard to this music, is black gospel music. I think that's some of the greatest music ever produced, right? But I want to make a point here. When I come to America, there's no way that I'm not going to some black churches and experiencing that culture. But the thing is, I know that I'm going to feel very uncomfortable walking into that black church, right? Now that discomfort for me is not going to be coming from a place of racism, as in like, I can't believe I'm here around these, black people. It's going to be coming from a place that I'm now about to step into a culture that is wholly different to the one that I have experienced. I'm stepping into different traditions, different types of music, different ways of, engaging with people. You probably should have a little bit of, I need to be on my best behavior here. I need to figure out how I can most respectfully engage with this culture. And there is a little bit of discomfort in that, but I don't think it comes from a place of racism. I think that it just comes from a place of, I'm going outside of the walled garden that I was raised in. I'm going into a territory that I don't quite know. And so, you can get better at doing that. But
fear. It's the fear of the unknown. It's a very base fear.
Yeah.
It's that fear from sitting around a fire and everything else is dark, and you don't want to leave the birth of that fire because you can't see past it, you know, because there might be something out there. There might be, and it's always might be. I might misstep. I might say the wrong thing. I might dress the wrong way. It's all might. You don't know. I don't know it. And I think that something like that, as long as we understand why we're afraid, because it's fear, but as long as we understand that why we're afraid is that we don't know, well, I mean, what can we know? We don't have, that's not in our ability, if it's true that knowledge is empirical, then all we know is based on what we can see, what we can experience, what we can, that we take in through our senses. And then there's of course the epigenetics that play into it, where there are some parts of our personality that are determined before we even come out of the womb. Like there's little parts of my sister. Sometimes I'll see her get that mischievous little smile and that I'm like, I remember you doing that when you were 6 months old. There's a part of you that has always existed since the moment you were, gestated. That's a very distinct part of you that will always exist. But for the most part, It is what we take in. You don't have knowledge of what comes next. You can, make a great guess, but you don't have knowledge. And so to be afraid of that lack of knowledge, well, it was never something you had in the first place. I think that there is nothing wrong with being prepared. But I remember you and I had that discussion through email where I was like, I don't have a PhD. And yet I'm here on a podcast where you regularly have these people with all of these crazy talents and credentials, and I don't have any of that. And I understand why I'm here. I do. But at the same time, it was of course I was afraid. I was afraid because my question, well, what can I do? What can I bring to the table that's, anything even close to what these people have? But in the end, it's not even about what makes me different or the same, I should not be afraid to just go and be myself wherever it is. It doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter what I do, as long as I'm myself when I do it, as long as I'm true to what I believe and how I'm going to interact. It doesn't matter,
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, perhaps even thinking, what do I have to offer here can sometimes get in the way of you offering exactly what would be best for you to offer. Meaning, I'm starting to think now, I'm about to start doing a whole bunch of interviews on other podcasts, because I've got this book coming out, and I've been thinking, but that shouldn't be the goal of the conversation. The goal of my conversation with these people should not be to say, well, I've got this book coming out, go and grab it, like going there just like, okay, what can I offer, to then, it's like, no, you go in there and you present who you are. And if your presentation of who you are resonates with people, they will pay attention to what you say. They will follow, what you do.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of conversations, and I've noticed this sometimes on my podcast, and it's like, this is when the conversation is not fun. It's when that the other person has something to promote, and that's the goal of them being here. And they want to get on, they want to have the conversation, they want to deliver a few truth bombs, and then they want to get off. And that's it. But this conversation is wholly different to that. Right? This is not that kind of conversation. This is two people exploring, dancing with ideas, and having a great time doing it,
Well, yeah. And I mean, I want people to understand there's no script. We didn't talk about anything beforehand. We jumped on Zoom.
We just jumped on.
We said, "Hey," and we just started talking. This entire conversation is that. It's just, I think we got on the topic of Amazon because I was talking about the mic I just purchased. And, I was looking at his mic, he was looking at my mic, and we were like, oh yeah, I got mine off Amazon. And then we just started talking about it. And not only that, we've mentioned philosophy a few times. We mentioned Stoicism a few times in a kind of meta sense, but it's been a very small part of the conversation, and yet philosophy has been the entire part of the conversation, because we don't have to talk about, we don't have to say words like dialectic. We can just engage. That's the point. It is the undercurrent of everything we're saying. We don't have to look at the camera and wink every time that we say something even considerably philosophical or anything having wisdom. We don't have to get in the nitty-gritty. We can just live that in everyday normal conversation and the way we talk about it. See, it's about the framing. It's about the way we talk about it. It's about taking all of that in mind. It's not about learning the equality of errors and talking about it from a textbook sense and giving a definition. It's about absorbing it into the way you think, and then it's living that way.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. And important point there, living that way. I mean, conversations like this where, like you say, it's like we're not necessarily exploring the history of philosophy, but philosophy is the thing that we're trying to engage in here, if we're trying to engage in anything. That's how your life can be as well, in terms of, don't tie yourself down to needing to be any one thing, or needing to present yourself in any certain way. But I heard this great definition of faith. They said, faith is the willingness to go on a great adventure, to trust that a great adventure might be had if you listen, and if you pay attention, and if you absorb what is in front of you, and if you focus on what is in front of you. This is what our lives can be when we drop the ideological commitments and just say, I'm going to go on an adventure and see what could become of this life if I have a conversation with reality, I don't know. So yeah, jump in.
I mean, honestly, I don't know how to add much to that. I feel like it was pretty poignant. Like, I feel like you hit the nail on the head with it. Like, that, you're exactly right. Like, that's why when I was mentioning that, when I first started reading Stoicism, it wasn't that it was any new concepts to understand. It was checking my work, like if we were looking at math, it's just going back through the steps and going, oh, okay, yeah. I see why this is, but it's something that I've dealt with every day, whatever this thing might be. Very little is actually a new concept if you really think about how your life works. It's describing things that we do every day and how we do them. And I think I was lucky to have a good upbringing in that way, that I had one grandfather with a doctorate, and he was a lawyer, and the other one had a doctorate in mathematics. He was a applied mathematics professor for a university. And so we would talk about math in a different way. It wasn't about the equations. It was about, this is an underlying language that we use to describe the world around us. What can we learn from it? But what does it learn from us? It's just a language that we've come up with. All of these things already exist. We've just assigned a language to it. That's it. And I think that in that line of thinking, it's not about, it really isn't about learning any specific kind of nomenclature. It's about living in a not necessarily correct. We can't really assign, we don't know what's correct. We can just try to resonate with what we think is, and I think that's what makes Stoicism in the first place, or just really any philosophy, is we all see truth. Well, we see the shadow of it, at least. And now, how do we try to resonate as close to it as we can? How do we try to oscillate at the same frequency as the truth, as the universe? I'm gonna tell you, it's hard. It's really hard to go against your just base desire. It's not easy, but at the same time, I think it becomes easy. I think it becomes easy to, when you're dealing with other people, it's a muscle you have to flex, it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. It's always about how you say it. And once you learn that that's the case, it becomes easier to do it. It becomes easier to just align with that, to align with what the sage would do. I think it's, I think just the hardest step is just jumping in. It's jumping in and just going with it.
Can I add something to what you're saying here? Because I think,
please do.
I agree with you. And I think that part of that jumping in is learning how to listen, not to what, the kind of hyper rationalizing version of you thinks that you should do with your life, but listening on a deeper level to, what is your nature as a human being, and what path are you being kind of called on to at the moment?
Right.
Because somebody like Kai, for example, I know that temperamentally, and just personality wise, Kai is supposed to be dealing with the terms, as in like, what does this word mean? How can I communicate this to people in the most effective way? How can I share stoicism in a way that actually brings people into that deeper logical framework, or that philosophical framework? He gave me this great recommendation. I'll have to just quickly look on YouTube here. I've been listening to this Muslim scholar that Kai has recommended to me. Oh gosh, this is going to start playing something here. Okay, his name is Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Okay, I know I've ruined that name, but that's okay. So I've been listening to this 11-hour lecture that he gives, just sitting there talking about logic as it relates to the Muslim faith and everything like that. And this is part one of like 3 parts of this, and right. I listened to this guy, and like, this guy is doing exactly what he is supposed to be doing. Now he's dealing with the terms, and he's teaching people about the very important logical frameworks that we might need to know in order to engage with the traditions in the most meaningful way, and in order to see the world in a certain way. But not everybody is supposed to be him. Not everybody is supposed to be the person dealing with the terms, sitting in front of everybody and saying, this is exactly what these words mean, and this is how you can break it down logically. Some people are supposed to, like, I feel like my biggest personal understanding lately has been that I'm a poet, and I say that because as soon as I started writing poetry, it resonated with me on such a deep level. And in like a year, I think I've written like, 300 poems or something like that. And, right. book. And then there's another one that's almost ready. And then there's another one that's kind of putting itself together. That's how I know that this is my nature, that it flows so naturally out, right? Now, people need to listen to that. And when you listen to that, then you can go on that adventure. You can have faith in that adventure and say, adherence to this nature that is within me is so much more important than saying, Stoicism is the philosophy. It's the one true way. And I think that if you listen back to my first podcast interviews, what I was doing, every question was basically the same. Every question was basically, why is Stoicism the best and most useful philosophy for everybody? You're like, that's the core question that I was asking, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to realize, no. Like, I'm going to go on my adventure. If people resonate with that, brilliant. I'm going to try and really figure some things out, but I'm not going to do it by adherence to this one particular ideology. I'm going to listen to what I am naturally being drawn into. And as I do that, I hope that people will learn from me, not to do what I do, but to do what they would do. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I would say that I am a huge purveyor of the Stoic kind of path. I think trying to figure out where it actually lies, that's, the Stoics were pretty incredible as a philosophy early on because, well, they changed. They didn't choose to say the same thing. And so I think a lot of people will accuse them of, having all these different conflicting ideas that they can't. Well, it's like some of those ideas have existed since Zeno.
Yeah.
And the Roman Empire was a very different place from Athens in 300 BC. It's not the same. And you can't expect people to think the same. And they're speaking different languages. We can't expect us nowadays to think the same because we've had all this history, but also our language does limit us. A lot of today, people will talk about Stoicism, the art of not caring and the art of, the pursuit of happiness. And I don't think Stoicism is about not caring. And I don't think Stoicism is about happiness.
Yeah.
happiness is a very fleeting thing. Happiness is an Epicurean idea. It is the idea of it is in English, the word happiness has to do with a very base form of pleasure. That's not what we're looking for at all. Because, and I think there's a lot of weird translations, and I don't know if Epictetus actually meant this, but the idea of if you were to lose someone that you love very deeply, like your son, why should you be unhappy? Well, I think by the terms of happiness in the English language, I think it would make you deeply unhappy. I think that if you weren't unhappy, there's something a little off. It's not about being unhappy. It's about still being able to be either content or sated, or it's not the same. It's you're trying to follow the path of what the Stoics would call arete, of which we don't really have a good translation. It's not. I wouldn't say. I personally don't ever say virtue because I don't think it carries such a heavy connotation. I think we should use the Greek word because it has such a deeper meaning of what they mean, and it's trying to resonate with the flow of the universe itself, with not pleasure. It's not about happy. It's not, your goal isn't to be happy. Your goal is to just do as the sage would do, because you're looking at what they're looking at, and what we think the sage is looking at is arete. It is the sole good, the underlying cause and example of the universe. And that is what they look at. It's not about if your child dies, yes, you will be unhappy. And it's something you will struggle with every day for the rest of your life. Even if you're perfect, even if you're, as close as we can get to the sage, it's a very human thing to mourn, and it's a respect. And to deny that respect is inhuman, because it's not what we're about. We are about respect and paying respect. And I don't think that is a Stoic thought at all. And yet it's one of the common ones that we talk about, is that kind of resilience of, well, no, you should, it's not about happiness. And it never has been, I don't think.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Well, that's kind of why I prefer the definition of flourishing, even though it still doesn't cover everything for eudaimonia, because flourishing, things can be falling down around you. But one of the Stoics loved these examples of people who lost everything, but when they were asked, how you feeling? They're like, I've still got everything I need with me. There's a sense that even amidst the storms of life, you can have a kind of moral fortitude. This flourishing is found within yourself and of yourself, or the self perhaps. But ultimately, it's something that you can take with you no matter what happens in your life. And so it's not the same as happiness, because you might be deeply unhappy, but still have a sense of that moral fortitude, of a sense of flourishing, in that you have everything that you need with you. And one other quick point on what you said there, because you mentioned that they were changing, they were evolving. I don't know if you remember, it seems like the past couple of decades, one of the themes that often pops up in electoral races is this politician's a flip-flop. They say this thing now, but they said this thing back then, and that's terrible. I think that what people are trying to say is that we don't really trust that this politician isn't just saying what we want them to say. We don't really trust that they're not just coming out there and changing their mind because it's the popular opinion now. What people want is a politician who has values and a core system of deeper values. But ultimately, there's nothing wrong with flip-flopping if what you're actually doing is saying, I was wrong back then. I think this is closer to the truth. Yeah, this is where I'm at now. And you're right. I think this is certainly part of, I don't quite understand. Well, I understand why people say it, but I think it's quite a dangerous path to go on, to be like, well, he said this here, but then he said this here. Even Seneca, his writings are full of contradictions. Yeah. But his letters show his letters show the evolution of his thought. They show him wrestling with these questions. And so he might say something at the end that he that goes against what he said at the start, but like he's changed because as you write, you're thinking, and as you're thinking deeply, you're evolving,
Well, I think it's a confliction. I think it's a huge conflict between how technology and media works now, and the fact that with the internet, especially, you have access to newspapers from different places that have existed since they started being published. Like they have them on file, things that you used to use a library for.
Yeah.
Now are so easily at your fingertips that you can just spurt the stuff up, which is whenever. Where, somebody went back through Kevin Hart's tweets from years ago.
Yeah.
And suddenly he's in hot water for like 3 or 4 tweets that he put out 10 years before, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. I don't think the same things.
Not even 5 minutes ago,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the craziest thing is both parts of that are human. To be afraid that someone is trying to use you, and to have a heavy kind of speculation about someone who might change their idea at the drop of a hat. It's a very human thing. But I think the inverse is, like trying to stay behind someone who has convictions and understanding that someone is constantly changing and morphing. That's also human. These are all human things that we do. It's about the wisdom of when to do it. It's nuanced. It's not about avoiding the snake oil salesman. You always want to avoid that. It's when should you do it? How far should that skepticism go? And I think that's something that people lack in a lot of ways now, is they are skeptical, but without kind of the critical thinking that goes along with being skeptical. And so that turns it more into, it's a critical thinking issue. It's an issue with you're not exercising that muscle of critical thought, because you don't have to. You don't have to know shorthand mathematics like you used to. When are you going to use it? You have a calculator on your phone. You can literally just ask your phone, hey, what is this times this minus this? And then you could say it, and then it'll tell you, why would you have to know shorthand notation now? I think because that's in order for you to become a self-actualized human being, you have to be able to have that critical thought. And when you are in a world that doesn't value that anymore because of the technology we have, it's a muscle that's not being exercised.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just a muscle that isn't being exercised. And that is something that I will always hope to combat when I can, maybe not on a mass scale, but every time it comes up, if somebody says something, it's, well, why do you think that? Just, why? And a lot of times people can't answer because they don't know why they think that. They don't. They were told, and they're like, well, good enough for me. And at the same time, someone else could tell them something. They're like, can't believe a thing they say. You gotta take nuance, and you gotta separate art from the artist. If someone Hitler said things that could be factual, does that mean that they don't have merit because he said it? No, of course they have merit, because the actual statement has merit. Not that you shouldn't carry over him into the statement. If the statement is accurate to the time and to the place, then the statement is accurate. It's not about who states it. And that's the crazy thing I think about.
I always knew you were a Nazi. Sorry, go on.
don't say that. Let's cut that one out. Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
It's more, which, side note, I went back and listened to the series that you had with Kai and Leo. I listened to every single one of them over about 2 days, which I just got my Spotify Wrapped, and I am in 91% of listeners on Spotify, which, hold on, let me tell you, it's a crazy amount that I listen to music and podcasts. It's very, it's not that important that I tell you, but I think you should know because it kind
I
of
think this
sets
is
a
going to be an
frame.
interesting segue into a question that I want to ask you. So go on.
45,603 minutes this last year. That is,
wow.
Let's see. I listened to 1,339 different artists on Spotify. That's crazy.
That is,
but no,
that is
I went
quite
back.
crazy. Yeah,
That's
amazing.
I listened to all of those episodes of your podcast, and there was one that stood out to me, and which we can cut this out if you want, but it had to do with, they were talking about the equality of errors.
We're not going to cut this out.
It was,
just say what you have to say. Yeah.
Okay. We were talking about the equality of error, or y'all were talking about the equality of errors, and there was something that you just didn't quite get your head around. And I was going to wonder if you ever got there with it, or if there was, because I remember they were talking about how I think you were talking about the idea of speaking evil into the world, about how it takes form by us giving it form. And they were like, well, the Stoics would believe that whether, you took part in a concentration camp or you had a flaw in your logic, both are errors or equal in the Stoics' eyes. And I remember there was kind of y'all talked about it for a good 15 minutes where like you would give a new example and they would just say the same thing over and over and over, hoping that it would say again. And what struck me is that because they from a historical perspective, they were looking at it the right way. I don't personally don't think that it was brought forward, like explained in a proper way. And I think that's why, and that's something that, as someone who I like to teach, that's something that I hate to say bothered me, because it was just the restatement of the same thing over and over instead of trying to put it in new terms. And because I think what they were trying to get at had nothing to do with, they should not have mentioned concentration camps off the bat. I think that peppers it with ethics in a way that I don't think they meant to. I think what they were trying to say is we have to separate and understand what part we as human beings create as far as meaning goes, and what part is inherent to the universe. To the universe, when we're talking about the idea of like a concentration camp, what's the difference between like a factory farm with chickens and a concentration camp of people to the universe? That, I think, is the example where there is a difference. Human life. That's a huge difference to humans. But that's because we're humans, right? To the universe, I don't know. I don't know if the universe really is a rational thinking being and sees us as a part of itself, or if it is a constant unblinking thing. That is what the Stoics meant by that, is that to the cosmos itself, everything happens as it should. And if something is incorrect, or if something is, as they would call it, an error, it's an error. It's not to pepper it with those ethical statements, because that's what we do. We have our own set of ethics and we apply it where we need to. And I think that the biggest part about Stoic ethics is it tries to transcend that and say, we're not talking about human ethics anymore. We're talking about Stoic ethics. And those are two different things. It's the ethics of the universe itself, not the ethics for a human being. And I think that's what they were trying to explain. And it, I made a note of it because it just, that, I don't know. I hate to, bring it forward in that way, because I don't want to.
No, man, this is constructive feedback. This is what it is. And I think like what I'm kind of hearing is perhaps I was dealing in the realm of like human ethics, because I'm really interested in when do humans' actions become something that we might call evil, right? Like a human being
Yeah.
does something and then you see it, you feel it, you understand it,
Yeah.
and you think this is pure evil, right?
Right.
But perhaps what they were speaking about is this kind of cosmological, like at
Yeah.
that level, everything is either an error or
Exactly.
the right thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the underlying point, I think, of the Stoic phenomenology, is
Yeah.
looking at it from there's a really cool thing about, and I really do want to write a book, and I've been gathering a lot of notes and getting ready for it, because I think there's something about explaining from the very basic, like you would a small child, in a way, of all of these little things leading into each other, where you focus on the self a little bit and you focus on the universe. You dial in more on the self and you expand the universe more. You keep, not only are you expanding the circles in a way, you're also contracting them. You're focusing in on certain things. You're dialing in really hard, but you're also expanding your outward focus. It's both at the same time. And I think the biggest part of that is all about starting at the right point and trying to see it from the self versus all, and go back and forth until you realize, oh, they're all one thing. They're all in a kind of resonance with each other. And that's part of the point of the Stoic path, is to become as far into that resonance as you can as a person.
Yeah.
It is to resonate as hard with the cosmos as you can and be a part of the cosmopolite. And I think that is the biggest thing that the philosophy struggles with right now. Is we discuss a lot of ethics and a lot of practice, and as much as you and I were talking about having this conversation, and this is philosophy, this is talk, but at the same time, I think there is an underlying amount of education that goes into being able to then live that way. And that was a big part of Musonius Rufus's teachings that Epictetus took forward. And that is that, yes, it is a philosophical practice. It's something you do. A Stoic isn't something you are, it's something you do. And it's about aligning your actions with it. But I think the biggest part of that we've lost is it's about learning what they would have learned about how they conceive all of this, the universe, the self. It's about learning it bit by bit. You learn a little bit, you practice a little bit. You learn a little bit, you practice a little bit, which is why I think your show was so compelling when you started, is because you're watching somebody go through that, where they're going through the steps of, they're learning it, they're talking about it, they're living it. You learn it, then you live it, you learn it, just back and forth. That's something that you did. And watching this evolve, watching you evolve to the point where now you can have philosophical conversations with the best of them, because you have the knowledge, you have the background knowledge of not only Stoic belief, but just of a lot of different philosophy. But it takes that. It takes you learning it little by little. And progress is not linear. Never has been. It's not for me. It's not for you. That's actually a Maria Montessori quote.
I'll pull you up on one thing there, because I think one of the reasons why I recently had that session where I presented, my own inspiration behind the walled garden. I was talking about this idea of enlightenment. And one of the things that I said at the end was like, I am the hypocrite. I am the snake oil salesman. I'm that, right? And I think that part of that is realizing that the adventure that I'm starting to go on now it's too ambitious for me to ever feel as though I have arrived, which means that in a sense, everything I ever teach, quote unquote, people, I have to have enough, this is not a humble thing to say, but I do have to have enough humility to recognize that probably some of what I teach people is going to be snake oilsy. It's going to be like, I don't quite understand it, but I'm trying to reflect something that is being shined, in the darkness. I'm trying to paint the picture of what I'm getting at here. I have to say, like, you talk about this idea of expanding the outer and expanding the inner until you realize that they're one thing. That idea and that personal awakening for me is actually written in The Poet and the Sage. There's a poem in there where I talk about, essentially, that view from above. You fly up into the stars and you see this grand cosmos, and you're a part of this thing, and you look down on Earth and you see all these little herds of people moving around, and you see how small we are, but then you dive back down to Earth, you dive into yourself, you close your eyes and you look within and you think, oh my gosh, the world within me is just as expansive as this cosmos, right? And I am this. We often think of it's me and then everything else outside of me, right? This is why I have a problem with this term external, because so often we can use the term external to describe everything outside of us. But when you really realize that, okay, well, I've got this layer of skin, and within this layer of skin is a whole bunch of organs that, and a whole bunch of tissue and a whole bunch of little pieces to this puzzle that build up what is me. And then within those things, within each organ, for example, there's more tiny little parts that break down that help that thing to serve me, which is this bigger part, right? And then even below that and below that and below that, even thinking about how atom, this word atom, was never supposed to be a certain point along that hierarchy. It was supposed to be the substance which makes up everything, right? Now, we called something an atom, but that was not the classical definition, because there's things below the atom, right? And so this poem kind of encapsulates this idea that I started to dive down into my body and realize, oh, it never ends, right? It never ends until it gets to that substance that is the same substance that has made up everything outside of my body.
Right.
And that's everything. And so we are this hyper connected, strange being, which is, I've had a really hard time wrestling with what Marcus Aurelius wrote. And it's actually in the book. It says something like, this wisdom from a sage of old. He said, the body is a river, the soul a dream and mist. It's like, what the hell does he mean? We read that, and if you don't have a theological mind, or if you're afraid to talk metaphysically or theologically, you'll read that and you'll just move on. There's nothing practical about that. That's kind of high poetry. I don't quite get that. But he meant something by that. We're this strange lump of kind of compressed information that's walking through a sea of infinite information.
Right.
It's wild.
Well, let's take it a step further. So philosophically, the idea of the external. So for the Stoics would be concerned about what is the one thing that the Stoics believe you have in your control? It's choice. It's your ability to assent. That is it. It is your ability to either assent or not to assent. That is the only thing that the Stoics feel is in your choice, in any way that may take form. Such as, if someone were to physically hold you down, you can always send that signal electrically from your brain to your body to move. It doesn't mean that your body will move, but you made the choice to move. That's the point. So that means that if that's the only thing that's in your control, everything else is external to that. That means your body is external. It means that it is a part of all of it. The only thing that, is wholly you is that choice. That's it. Everything else is, you're in a vessel and you're along for the ride. You are intrinsically part of everything, because it is all external to the one thing you have control over. And you have this, you are in a way, a base animal. You have instinct, you have the need to consume and to procreate. But at the end of the day, for the rational self, which is what we consider us, in the philosophical sense, everything is external, including our bodies, all of it.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then we are, in every thought, we are swimming in the void at all times. We are a part of all of it. And, we've talked about the idea of flux before, and the idea that you can not change, that you cannot be a part of this flow it's so untrue. The choice to stay stagnant is the worst choice you can make, because you can't stay stagnant.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
a river. You are a river. There is no reason why you should not try to flow with everything else, because the choice to not flow, you're going to end up flowing whether you're going against the current or not.
Yeah.
The best way
Yeah.
is to go with the current.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, I don't mean that politically. I mean that with your soul, man. You gotta keep going.
Yeah. And this is why I love, I think artists can teach us this more than anything. People like Miles Davis, for example, the reason
I knew you were
why
going to bring up Miles.
Yeah, the reason why he changed, because I love this guy, right? The reason why he changed the course of the music industry so many times was because he was in touch with that flow. Like, if
Right.
somebody asked him, like, hey, tell us about this album that you did 10 years ago, he's like,
Yeah.
no, another question, please. I don't want to talk about what I did 10 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
it was a revolution then. Talk about what I'm doing now. We can all do that in our lives by having the humility to trust. Like, you trust that the adventure that you could go on, if you let go of all of your ideological reservations, that adventure you can go on is so much better than anything you can ever find by saying, like, this is exactly, like, this is the only true good way and this is what I'm sticking to. It's like it's a wide world out there of experience. And that's, like you talk about, experience is so much greater than, like, this is the thing that I'm sticking to. So it's exciting, man. Once you start talking in these sorts of ways about life, it just opens your mind to the possibilities of what could come about if you really decided to trust that you are a part of something much bigger. Like, I think one of the biggest revelations for me was just recognizing, like, hang on, every single creature is being moved, like the lion doesn't get up in the morning and think, what should I do today? The lion doesn't get depressed about, like, a lack of meaning in its life. It's like it just gets up and it does exactly what a lion does. Now, we've in a sense lost that as human beings. I think that that's part of the idea of the fall, right? Is that, we lose that connection to that part of us that simply moves us. Now, it never leaves us. We are always being moved in this river.
Yeah.
But we also have this ability to actually state, I am going to trust in the part of me that is moving me. And I'm going to, even in the Catholic sense, faith and reason, right? I'm going to have faith, but I'm going to back it up with reason for why I should have faith in this journey that we're all going on in life. It's just so much more exciting to do it that way, than to just constantly be saying, I need to be this, and this. Maybe you need to be whatever it is that you are being pulled towards, whatever calls out to you, the golden snitch that shines in front of you. Maybe that's what you need to follow,
I do know. And it's, I don't know. It's such a blessing to be able to experience the day, and that's one of the biggest things that I glean from reading people like Seneca is, when you greet the morning, I think a lot of the things that people will talk about on YouTube with the Stoics is, like, take a cold shower, practice being comfortable. It's like, all right, why don't we start with, when you wake up, be thankful that you woke up. Be thankful that it didn't all just end, that you closed your eyes and then that was it. Be thankful that each new day, it's a new day. Like, saying a new day has all these connotations, but really, really think about it. It is a new day. It is a new day. You got to experience a new day. Like, you should just wholly always be grateful that you get to experience this. That is one of the biggest, not fears I have, but reservations I have about everyday philosophy for people. Because, philosophy is just partially how everybody lives their lives in a given day. Everybody subscribes to philosophy, whether they think about it or not. And one of the biggest ones that has been on the rise for the past few years, if you look at all of our media and the way people talk, is this weird technological nihilism, where it's always about, they never go a step far enough. It's always, this is an unblinking, uncaring universe, and we're going to go through a heat death one day, and everything will just cease to exist, and nothing matters. Okay, I think that intrinsically there might not be a value assigned to things, and that's what the Stoics would say, is that there is no intrinsic good or bad to a thing that's happening. Like you're on a boat, and this is one of the oldest syllogisms in the Stoic tradition, is you're on a boat and you see the wave and it's about to crash above you, and you look over and you're terrified, and you look over and you see a Stoic, and he looks terrified for a second, and then the wave comes and everything's okay, and he said, "You look terrified for a second." They said, "Well, that was my body. That wasn't me. It was my body reacting to this thing that's happening." But when it got to the part that's me, where you might say that there's a wave above my head, and that's a bad thing because of all the implications of a wave being above my head, the rational self would say, as a Stoic, there's a wave above my head, and it ends there. That's it. There's just a wave. It's not a bad thing. It just is. There's a wave. I'm on a boat, and there's a wave. And those are the only things that's it. And that we assign that is a choice, that good, that bad, that's something that we choose to do. And I think that is the biggest part about, a lot of people call it the dichotomy of control and whatnot, about really, really being able to control your own thoughts through, understanding, is this good? Is this bad? That's the equality of errors, I think, really boils down to, is it's this, there's one sole good, and to them that would be arete, and other than that, everything just is. And the good, the bad, that's something that we see. It's something that we want to see. We actively choose to call something good or evil, and to assign that. It's choice, though, and we have to be honest to ourselves. We have to be aware when we make the choice. We have to be self-aware, and then not only that, we have to then make the choice of whether that's the choice we want to make. Should we assign that? Should we let something make us afraid because we've chosen to let it make us afraid? Or do we overcome that and just say that, the world might be a cold, uncaring place, but that's not the value that I choose to assign. That might be the value that somebody else chooses to assign, but the world might not have intrinsic meaning, but I will assign meaning, because that is something that is in my ability to do. And it's something I think I should do. I think it's a two-step system that so many people get there, and they say, they talk about the void and everything ending, and they don't come with the second part, which is, and that's okay. Because it has to be. You make the choice whether you could be okay with it or not, because whether you're okay with it or not, it's happening. So you might as well be okay with it. It's happening.
Yeah. Well, I think this is something that Kai has actually done a really good job of showing, which is that
I agree.
Ultimately, we all have these kind of a priori assumptions about the world, these core beliefs, and it is a belief, and you kind of get to choose that, like, of course, like, you're raised in a certain place, certain time, you're going to get raised with the spirit of that age. But the free human being, and freedom is something that we're all aiming at, right? Says, oh, I've just dived into this river, and I've kind of popped out. It's like that image. I can't remember where that guy's kind of looking outside the edge of the cosmos, finally gets to see outside there. And then you say, oh, okay. So really what I need to do here is assemble a value system of beliefs that enables me to most beautifully and effectively engage with life, and really engage with life and take it on and accept the suffering of this existence. And I think it's a really freeing understanding when you get to that, right? Because and one other thing that I would say to what you were saying before is, I think that one of the great things there's so many great things about these ancient kind of mythopoetic traditions, things like the Bible, the Tao Te Ching, obviously the Quran, these sacred texts. It seems to me like something about these sacred texts that allows them to withstand the test of time is that they're speaking about truths that and values that have like a universal property to them, or at least that's what they're aiming at. But as soon as we lose that core universal aim of the highest possible good, it seems like the philosophy tends to just become a slave to the spirit of the current time, which is why I would say that a lot of the philosophy that's being written today actually doesn't necessarily fall into the category of what we might call philosophy, but it's actually more personal development, because that's the spirit of the time.
It's topical.
The spirit of the time. It's top. And so this is why I've often said in the past few months, it's like Seneca wasn't writing his letters because some company said to him, hey, the market really wants this from you right now. You should write this book because Stoicism is hot right now, baby. Come on, let's, that's not what it was about. He's trying to wrestle with truths that he's trying to find truths that are universal, that stand the test of time, speaking in a spirit of all ages. And we lose that when we lose touch with those ancient traditions that are passed down through the time-tested method of mythical, poetic, prose, this amazing sacred text. And the final thing I'll say there is, I think this is such an egotistical statement, so I'm sorry. But since I started writing poetry, right, I've been thinking that's what I'm trying to engage in. That tradition is what I'm trying to engage in, because it seems like what the Bible is, it's a collection of books that people decided over thousands of years, this is something that we can aspire to. It's like virtue in writing, virtue in understanding, virtue in knowledge of this cosmos. This is like, it's like if you could write anything, try to write this, and the Bible inspired so much incredible intellectual endeavor over the thousands of years after it. Right. And I think part of that is looking at the Bible and thinking, how do you ever attain the glory of a book like that? That's so high above me. And so when I started writing poetry, I was thinking, maybe the best thing that I could do is try to write something that stands the time like that. Do you know what I mean? That's a really egotistical statement to even imagine that I could possibly do something like that. But what better thing could you possibly aim at?
I want you to explain to me why you think it's egotistical.
Well, it's egotistical because to have the audacity to believe that you could put together any sort of writings that would stand the test of time like a sacred text. But these people come along every so often, like Rumi, even Rilke, some of his poetry, it's just like you read that and you're like, that's deep. You can't get to the bottom of it. But and these people come along, even my own childhood tradition of Mormonism, it's based upon this guy who was like, I consider him to be, one of the great poets of our time. Like Joseph Smith, he put together the Book of Mormon, right? Whether or not it's like factually correct in terms of historical fact, or whatever you think about Joseph Smith, there's lots of stuff to think about him. I'll give you that. But if he wrote this book, the Book of Mormon, or even like the Doctrine and Covenants, the sacred works of Joseph Smith, it's like he was a real poet, at least, and he really wrote something that stood the test of time in terms of building communities around this sacred text that connected itself to the Bible. You start to think, like to have the ego to even imagine that you could write something that would be that influential in history. I think it's extremely dangerous. I think it's dangerous to think that you could do that, which is why you have to say, well, gird your loins. Like you might want to be a better person than what you are now. You might want to have some sort of real substance to you in order to even believe that you could do that. So I don't know. I think it is egotistical, and which is why I would only say it to like, well, I'm saying it to everybody, but yeah, I don't know. Why don't you see the ego in that?
I think the ego lies in the statement of, I'm going to try to make something like the Bible or like something else. What you're saying is, I'm going to make something that I believe in that stands the test of time. That's not egotistical. What would be egotistical was to say, I want to make something that is as prolific as the Bible, if not more. That's egotistical.
Yeah.
But saying, I'm going to make something that I feel has deep meaning, that I believe in, that I would like to stand the test of time. I'm going to design it in such a way that it's translatable and that it's deeply personal, and it might not be for everybody, but at the same time, I want it to be able to resonate. That's not egotistical. That's a service. You were providing a service. That's the opposite of ego. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it because you feel it needs to be done. That, as long as that's the goal, if the goal is for your own legacy and to try to, theoretically live as long as possible through a legacy, then yes, it's egotistical.
Yeah.
But that's not why you're doing it.
Well,
you're not doing it for ego.
Like, I think so often when I'm writing, I find that I have to assume that I'm writing these things for some sort of deeply egotistical reason. I have to assume that so that I'm at least starting from the standpoint that I might not have the right motivations here. So I at least look at myself, and sometimes I'll write something, and before I write it, I'm like, oh, you're really going to say that? Like you're really going to make that claim, And the reason I pause before I write it is because I think like Jung said, be very careful of unearned wisdom. I think that's good advice. Whenever I write something, I don't want it to be unearned wisdom, because that can easily degenerate into very dangerous egotistical writing where, you start to think, like, oh, you're this God delivering to the nations, and I really try to check myself when I'm writing poetry, because it is like when I write poetry, and I think this is the experience of many people who write poetry, it's coming from a place not of sitting down and thinking rationally, well, this is what I want to teach people. It's coming from a place where it's like something is bubbling up from the depths and presenting itself, and you have to catch that and put it on the page. And inherently in that process is the ego, meaning like it's like, a lot of poets write things about their experience that is just like really, you're making that claim? And so I think it helps to actually assume that I'm doing it for nefarious reasons, right? So that I am always checking myself against that standard,
Yeah. And I completely agree that you should. You should always, but at the same time, someone who is checking themselves against being egotistical is probably not an egotist. I
don't know about that. It's hard because, I could be saying all of these things because I want to deceive you into thinking that I'm not egotist. It's that developing a relationship with the shadow, and trying to figure out like, what the hell are you up to? What are you really up to here with your podcast or with your writings or with everything? It's like, and I often find myself falling into bad habits of thinking that what I'm doing is supposed to be about like promoting what I'm doing, or I'm supposed to be, getting more followers, getting more listeners and stuff like that. But I think lately I've been trying to pull myself back in and say, no. Just trust that if you say something useful, meaningful, important, the people who need to listen will listen. Just trust that all you have to do is present what you believe to be most important and meaningful and useful. That's
Right.
it. Then stand back and see what happens, But that's really hard to do because I've grown up in this culture, as have you, where, people who smush bread against their face have millions and millions of followers. And sometimes you think, maybe I should just start smushing bread against my face. Like you start to think maybe that's what they want, and maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. But you have to pull yourself back and say, like,
right,
that's not what it's about,
Exactly. It's looking at the goal. Smush bread on your face. If your goal is to get a bunch of subscribers at once and then have them never look at your content again. You do that if your goal is to get money, get subscribers, to
celebrity.
Be seen.
Yeah.
I don't think you really are doing this so that you can be seen, Simon. I think you're doing this because you think it's what you need to be doing. And that's the most important thing is, I think, as long as you hold on to that, which we talked about this before you started doing the walled garden, this exact thing. It was like, as long as you hold on to that, man, and you are, you are so deeply grounded. I don't think you need to be as afraid that you're going to come across egotistical because you don't. You really don't. I don't think I hear any of your podcasts and I think, wow, this guy really is jerking himself off today. I don't ever think that. I think that you come across as this whole genuine person that's deeply curious and cares about the world around him. And, I love watching you cultivate that. And I would not worry. I really wouldn't. I think you're doing a great job, man.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate those words because it is very, it is always useful for me to hear what other people see in what I'm doing. But I think also, I'll tell you that one of the things that I do constantly struggle with is like, yeah, I'm on this adventure. I'm trying to figure things out. I'm trying to engage with life in this way. But at the end of the day, I've got just as many faults as everybody else. I've got just as many, like illnesses of the soul, like Seneca called them, that I'm trying to cure. And, so part of that is I'm always thinking like, you don't deserve to be having these kinds of conversations and presenting yourself in such a way when you are just as sick as the people who you're talking to, and I think that's why, I would not have said that 2 years ago on the podcast. I will say that today because I'm trying to engage in a different way. I'm trying to show people that like never, like you listen to this podcast and you might think, wow, this guy's got something going here, like, yeah, baby, keep it up, but like I'm struggling on the inside because, I'm on one hand, I'm dealing with these deep issues and I'm trying to build myself up into somebody who has some sense of authority on these subjects, and authority not from I have a piece of paper and a degree, but authority in that like there's some genuine embodied wisdom here. So I'm dealing with those high concepts, but on the other end, I'm just this, sick individual who, is in so many ways still the product of this culture that we've all been raised in, where, there's so many traps to fall into, and I've fallen into so many of those traps. So it's like, you bring those two together and you say, like, I'm going on this path of alignment as well, and trying to make sure that the wisdom matches the output and the effort, and so I'm not this divided personality where on screen I'm this person and in my life I'm this person. And I think that we're all trying to wrestle with that in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And we've had this conversation. You have a very similar experience where you struggle with things as well, right? And I think the more we can all recognize that we're all hypocrites. We're all deceptions, like we're all struggling with these issues of the spirit of our current age. And I think that the walled garden in part is saying, come on in, come on in. Let's just discuss this together, like as equals, not as podcast host and listener, but come and engage with us, and maybe together we can all strengthen each other and learn together. So I think that's what I'm so excited about, is just opening up and saying, like I say to every single one of my clients, like, just like Seneca here, like, I'm just another person in this hospital with you. Don't ever imagine that when you're jumping on with this sage of coaching, it's like, no way. I just want to talk to you and maybe we can both get better,
Yeah. But don't forget that in the same vein that you're just as sick as everybody else, they're all just as sick as you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't ever forget it, that say you say something wrong and someone corrects you. Okay. Well, you can either disagree about it, or you can, hash it out, or you can say, you know what? I haven't thought about it that way. Let's move forward. And you can, and you do all the time. Like, I could think of no better person to be, running the situation the way you are. I think you are being exactly who you are. And I think it makes for such a great experience for not only a listener, but someone to come on and discuss with you. And, in the same vein, of course, you don't want to like get a big ego and think that, my advice would to not try to be an authority. It's just something that ends up happening because of the knowledge that you have. You're not trying to gain the knowledge to be an authority. You're just gaining the knowledge. And then the authority isn't up to you. It's how other people see you, and you can't influence how other people see you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just be yourself.
Yeah. I am very fortunate that I don't have enough subscribers to have the ego so high right now. So I'm glad I've come to this place before I get there. Because if I ever get there, who knows? But that's as we say, that's not the most important thing here. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I feel like I should definitely be respectful of your time now, because it's been 2 hours and 40 minutes. But
cut it however you want.
Well, let's just cut it here, because we're going to have more conversations. And let me say this. You've got the booking link. You, Joe, have an open invitation to book in a conversation whenever you want. And we'll just do this again, because this is so much fun for me. And like I said, you're just like Glenn in terms of, we can just get together and we can just fire ideas back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens. So
who knows if it's going to be a great listening experience, but it's definitely fun for us. So
it will be. Yeah. If it's fun for us, and if it's a great experience for us, if we, in the same way that, when you write poetry, if you're really feeling the message as it comes, like that gets transferred into the reader's experience. I've seen that happen. The same thing happens with interviews. What we really want is for us to have a brilliant conversation, not even think about the audience, right? They'll come along if we came along, Right. So and this is just brilliant. Man, thank you for the beautiful conversation.
Yeah. And thank you for being open, and really truly being open. And it's hard, especially when you're putting yourself out there. And that's something I was worried about, because I knew that this is the first time I'd ever made myself public in any way. And the ability that you have to just lay that vulnerability down is huge. It's huge. You're showing precisely who you are in the given moment. And it's not a script. You're not trying to push anything. You are being exactly as you are. You are expressing exactly as you feel in every given moment in this conversation we've had. And even if we have a minor disagreement about one or two things, it doesn't feel like a disagreement. It feels like we're just talking.
Yeah. Conversation. That's what
Yeah.
it is, mutual respect, mutual
Yeah.
caretaking, mutual belief that we could actually have a conversation that leads us both to a better place than when we started, and that's it. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
everything.
and that's the beauty of it. I think that's the best place to cut it. Right there.
Cut. You've been listening to the Walled Garden Podcast. For more episodes just like these, or to join our community, go to thewalledgarden.com. See you there.